All right, so get ready because today we are diving into some seriously deep philosophical waters.
Oh, yeah.
We're tackling moral skepticism.
Yeah.
And trust me, this isn't just some like surface level exploration.
Right.
We're going deep down.
Deep, deep, deep.
Deep down to those like foundational questions that keep philosophers up at night.
Oh, yeah.
You've shared with us an excerpt from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on moral skepticism.
Right.
So let's unpack what makes this such a compelling and often unsettling
Yeah.
area of thought, especially for someone with your background in philosophy.
You've hit the nail on the head. Unsettling is a great way to describe it. It's not about becoming a moral monster
Right.
or rejecting all sense of right and wrong. It's about questioning how we arrive at those judgments in the first place,
Yeah.
how we can be sure of their validity,
Right.
and what happens if those foundations crumble.
It's like we are examining the blueprints of morality itself,
Yes.
trying to understand how the whole structure holds together.
Precisely. And as we examine those blueprints,
Yeah.
we'll find that moral skepticism isn't just one neat and tidy concept.
Right.
It's more like a spectrum of views,
Okay.
each with its own nuances and challenges.
Interesting.
Some skeptics target the very possibility of moral knowledge,
Right.
while others focus on whether we can even have justified moral beliefs.
Right.
And then there are those who go even further,
Whoa.
questioning whether moral claims can be objectively true at all.
So it's not just about like whether stealing a cookie is wrong.
Right.
It's about whether there's even a meaningful way to say something is wrong, objectively speaking.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty like fundamental challenge.
Absolutely. Take the classic example of slavery.
Okay.
Most people would vehemently agree that slavery is wrong.
Right.
But a moral skeptic might ask, how do we know that with absolute certainty? Is that judgment based on something inherent to the act itself, or is it rooted in our emotions, social conditioning, or cultural norms?
It seems like that kind of opens up a whole can of worms there.
It does.
If we can't be sure of even something as seemingly obvious as the wrongness of slavery,
Right.
what does that mean for other moral judgments?
That's the crux of it. Moral skepticism forces us to confront the potential fragility of our moral convictions. Now, within this landscape of doubt,
Yeah.
we encounter different flavors of skepticism,
Okay.
each with its own approach.
All right.
There are those who adopt a more dogmatic stance,
Okay.
asserting that moral knowledge is simply impossible.
Right.
Then there are the Pyrrhonian skeptics, masters of suspending judgment,
Okay.
who refrain from making any definitive claims about the existence or non-existence of moral truth.
Okay, so we've got the skeptics who plant their flag firmly in the camp of no moral knowledge.
Yes.
And those who are content to kind of hover in a perpetual state of, we can't know for sure.
Right.
It sounds like a pretty lively philosophical debate waiting to happen.
Definitely. And for a philosopher like yourself,
Yeah.
engaging with these diverse skeptical perspectives is crucial.
Yeah, I can see that.
After all, if we can't be certain of any moral knowledge,
Right.
what happens to concepts like moral responsibility, justice, and the pursuit of a good life?
Yeah.
These are cornerstones of many ethical theories.
Yeah, those are some pretty weighty concepts to be left hanging in the balance.
Indeed.
It's not just an abstract thought experiment.
No.
It has real-world implications for how we understand and act in the world.
For sure.
But let's get down to brass tacks.
Okay.
How do these moral skeptics actually build their case?
Yeah.
What are the arguments they deploy to cast doubt on our moral beliefs?
One of their most potent weapons is the argument from moral disagreement.
Okay.
It's something we encounter constantly, even among intelligent,
Yeah.
well-intentioned individuals.
Yeah.
Look at the debates surrounding issues like abortion or euthanasia.
Oh, yeah.
They've raged for centuries with no clear consensus in sight.
That's for sure. It seems like no matter how much we debate,
Right.
we keep running into these fundamental disagreements about what's right and wrong.
Exactly. And this persistent discord,
Yeah.
even under seemingly ideal conditions for reasoned discussion, is what fuels the skeptics' fire.
Okay.
They argue that if there were objective moral truths,
Right.
wouldn't we expect to see more convergence in people's beliefs, at least among those who are genuinely striving for moral understanding?
It's a compelling point if morality were like math,
Right?
where there are clear-cut right and wrong answers.
Yeah.
Wouldn't we expect to see more agreement, especially among those well-versed in the subject?
Precisely, the skeptics use this persistent disagreement as evidence that perhaps morality is more subjective and culturally influenced than we'd like to believe.
Yeah.
Of course, there are counterarguments to this.
Right.
Some philosophers argue that even if we disagree on specifics, we might all be tapping into some shared underlying moral principles.
Right.
But the skeptic's point is that identifying and justifying those shared principles is much harder than it seems.
So the lack of, like, a universal moral consensus is one arrow in the skeptic's quiver. What other arguments do they use to, like, poke holes in our moral certainty?
Well, they also raise the issue of moral explanations.
Okay.
Can we make sense of the world, particularly human behavior, without invoking moral language at all?
Okay. I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Imagine we're trying to understand why a historical figure, say, a ruthless dictator, committed horrific acts.
Okay.
We could analyze their psychology, their upbringing, the political and social pressures of the time, and so on.
Yeah.
All of these explanations rely on facts and historical context,
Right.
but not on explicit moral judgments.
So we're explaining their actions,
Right.
the how and the why,
Yes.
without necessarily saying they were evil or morally wrong.
Exactly. And the moral skeptic asks,
Okay.
does adding that moral judgment actually enhance our understanding?
Right.
Does calling someone evil explain anything beyond what we already glean from the non-moral facts?
It's like asking whether evil is a real thing in the world,
Right.
like gravity,
Yes.
or just a label we slap onto actions we find repugnant.
That's a great way to put it, if we can explain events fully without appealing to moral truths.
Yeah.
The skeptic might argue that those truths are superfluous, not essential to our understanding of the world.
But hold on, doesn't that undermine concepts like justice and accountability?
Right.
If we can't say someone did something morally wrong,
Yeah.
how can we hold them responsible for their actions?
You've hit on a major point of contention. Defenders of objective morality would argue that
Okay.
while non-moral factors can explain how an action occurred,
Right.
moral facts are still necessary to evaluate that action,
Yeah.
to determine its rightness or wrongness, and to assign responsibility.
Right.
They'd say that stripping away moral language actually diminishes our understanding of events, their moral significance.
So it's a debate about whether moral judgments are woven into the very fabric of reality,
Yeah.
essential for making sense of human actions,
Right.
or whether they're more like subjective interpretations layered on top,
Yes.
not truly reflective of objective truths.
Exactly. And this debate gets even more heated when we introduce the next skeptical argument,
Right.
the infamous regress problem.
Ooh. This is the one I've been waiting for.
Yeah.
I've heard whispers of its brain-twisting potential.
Right.
Lay it on me. What's the regress problem all about?
It all boils down to justification. Think about any moral belief you hold,
Good.
like the belief that lying is wrong.
Okay.
The regress problem asks, what's the basis for that belief? What justifies it?
Okay.
You might appeal to a broader principle,
Yeah.
like the importance of honesty or the harm that lying causes.
Right.
But then the skeptic would ask, and what justifies that principle?
It's like an endless chain of whys.
Yes.
Each answer demanding further justification.
Precisely. The skeptic's point is that this process leads to one of two undesirable outcomes.
Okay.
Either an infinite regress where justifications go on forever,
Right.
or a circular argument where you end up justifying a belief by ultimately appealing to that same belief.
Neither of those sounds very satisfying. It's like trying to define a word by using the word itself in the definition.
Exactly.
So how do we escape this justificatory trap?
Well,
Do we just give up and declare moral beliefs unfounded?
philosophers have proposed various ways to ground moral beliefs and stop the regress.
Okay.
Some appeal to self-evident moral intuitions,
Okay.
arguing that certain moral truths are just intrinsically known, requiring no further justification.
So it's like saying we just know that torturing innocent people is wrong.
Right.
It's a fundamental intuition, not something we need to prove.
Yes. That's the intuitionist approach. Others favor a coherentist view,
Okay.
suggesting that moral beliefs gain justification by fitting together into a consistent and coherent system.
So it's not about finding some ultimate foundation.
Right. No.
But about ensuring our moral beliefs all work together harmoniously like pieces of a well-constructed puzzle.
Exactly. But of course, the skeptic would raise objections to both of these approaches.
Uh-huh.
They might argue that intuitions are unreliable, varying from person to person, and that a perfectly coherent system of beliefs could still be entirely detached from objective reality.
So they're not letting us off the hook so easily.
No.
But this brings us to what I think is the most unsettling argument in the skeptic's arsenal.
Right.
The idea of spooky skeptical hypotheses.
Ah, yes. This is where things get truly meta. We're venturing into the territory of radical doubt,
Going.
inspired by philosophers like Descartes and his famous deceiving demon.
The one who could manipulate our senses and make us believe anything, right?
Right. That's enough to keep anyone up at night.
That's enough to keep anyone up at night.
Indeed, and moral skeptics take this a step further with the skeptical hypothesis of moral nihilism.
Okay, that sounds ominous.
Yeah.
Break it down for me. Does moral nihilism mean everyone just throws out their moral compass and chaos ensues?
Not necessarily. It's important to distinguish between moral nihilism as a claim about how people should behave
Okay,
and moral nihilism as a claim about the nature of morality itself.
got it.
Right.
So a moral nihilist might still live a perfectly decent life.
Right.
They just wouldn't believe there's any objective truth to morality.
Exactly. Moral nihilism in this context is the view that nothing is inherently morally right or wrong.
Okay.
It's not saying anything goes in terms of behavior.
Right.
It's saying that moral judgments lack any grounding in objective reality.
So acts like murder or theft aren't objectively wrong.
Right.
They're just actions with certain consequences,
Right.
but no inherent moral weight attached to them.
Precisely. And just like Descartes' deceiving demon,
Okay.
the skeptic argues that if we can't definitively rule out moral nihilism,
Right.
then how can we be truly justified in our moral beliefs?
I could see how that would be a real gut punch to anyone who believes in objective morality.
Yes.
It's like saying, what if everything you thought was right or wrong is just a grand illusion?
It's a deeply unsettling thought, and to make matters even more challenging, moral skeptics often combine moral nihilism
Yeah?
with explanations for why we might hold moral beliefs, even if they're not true.
So it's not just nothing is wrong, but also here's why you think things are wrong, even though they're not.
Exactly.
You talked about a double dose of skepticism.
It is, they might argue that moral beliefs evolved because they were advantageous for social cooperation,
Okay.
even if they don't reflect objective truths.
Right.
Or they might point to cultural conditioning as a way of explaining why we internalize certain values.
So they're saying morality is just a useful fiction, a set of rules we've invented to get along,
Right.
but not grounded in anything ultimate or real. That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is, and of course you might be thinking, but surely some things are just obviously wrong.
Exactly.
Like torturing babies for fun, how can anyone deny that?
My intuition screams, no way, that's just wrong, full stop.
And that's a natural response. But the moral skeptic would use this very example to highlight their point.
Oh.
They'd ask, even if you feel strongly that it's wrong, can you provide a justification that doesn't rely on some pre-existing moral belief that a nihilist would reject?
So they're pushing us to justify our most fundamental moral convictions. To demonstrate their validity without taking any moral assumptions for granted. That's a tall order.
It is indeed. This deep dive into moral skepticism is forcing us to confront the potential limitations of our moral reasoning
Right.
and to grapple with the possibility that our most cherished moral beliefs might be more fragile than we realized.
So we've been bombarded with this barrage of skeptical arguments.
Right.
Each one chipping away at our sense of moral certainty.
Yes.
It's enough to make anyone question the very foundations of their ethical framework.
Yeah.
Is there any way to salvage our moral beliefs from this onslaught of doubt?
Well, it's not necessarily a case of complete moral collapse.
Okay.
Remember, moral skepticism is about rigorously examining our beliefs.
Right.
Not about dictating what we should or shouldn't believe. It's a catalyst for deeper reflection, not a prescription for nihilism.
That's a good point. It's about asking tough questions,
Right.
not necessarily providing definitive answers.
Yeah.
Are there any life rafts in this sea of skepticism? Any ways to navigate these treacherous waters without completely abandoning our moral compass?
There are, and one approach that might resonate with a philosopher like yourself is Pyrrhonian moral skepticism.
Okay.
Remember those skeptics who are masters of suspending judgment?
Right. The ones who are skeptical even of being skeptical.
Exactly.
They seem pretty well equipped to handle the kind of doubt we've been wrestling with.
Exactly. Pyrrhonian skeptics don't outright deny the possibility of moral knowledge or justified belief.
Okay.
Instead, they advocate for a cautious approach,
Right.
recognizing the limits of our justification and embracing a certain degree of humility about our moral pronouncements.
So it's less about saying morality is a complete illusion
Yes,
and more about acknowledging that we can't be absolutely certain about our moral judgments.
precisely one way they approach this is through the concept of contrast classes.
Okay.
Imagine you're grappling with a complex ethical dilemma like whether to intervene in a foreign conflict.
Okay, so I'm weighing the potential benefits of intervention. preventing human suffering, promoting democracy,
Right, yeah.
against the potential risks like loss of life, unintended consequences.
Exactly. This set of options, the potential courses of action you're considering,
Yeah.
constitutes a modest contrast class.
Okay.
You're comparing and contrasting different choices within a specific moral framework.
Right. I'm trying to figure out the least bad or most good option
Right.
within a set of limited possibilities, even if there's no perfectly clear answer.
Now imagine you expand that contrast class to include moral nihilism,
Okay.
the view that nothing is inherently right or wrong.
Right.
Suddenly the question isn't just about which action is best,
Yeah.
but whether any of these actions have any inherent moral weight at all.
Whoa, that shifts the whole landscape.
It does.
It's like the ground rules of the game have completely changed.
Exactly. Pyrrhonian moral skeptics might argue that within a modest contrast class,
Yep.
we can have reasons to favor one action over another,
Right.
even if we can't achieve absolute certainty.
Okay.
But when we introduce that extreme contrast class,
Yeah.
the level of justification becomes much more tenuous.
So it's like saying yes, intervening to prevent genocides
Yeah.
seems like the right thing to do.
Right.
But if nothing is truly right or wrong, then my confidence in that judgment diminishes significantly.
You've got a Pyrrhonian skepticism encourages us to be mindful of the scope of our justification,
Yeah.
to recognize that our moral beliefs might hold up well within a limited framework,
Okay.
but become less certain when we consider more radical alternatives.
That's a nuanced and insightful approach.
Right,
It's not about collapsing into moral relativism or nihilism,
right.
but about cultivating a healthy skepticism towards our own moral pronouncements.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that while we can and should strive for moral understanding,
Right.
we should also be aware of the potential for error,
Yeah.
for bias, for limitations in our knowledge.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive.
Good.
It's challenged me to re-examine my own moral beliefs and to appreciate the depth and complexity of these philosophical debates.
It is fascinating stuff.
It is.
And it's always relevant. It
Yeah.
never goes away.
So for all of our listeners out there, whether you find yourself siding with the skeptics or defending the possibility of moral knowledge,
Right.
I hope this exploration has sparked some critical reflection.
Yeah.
It's reminded us that the quest for moral understanding is an ongoing journey, not a destination.
Well said. And as you continue to ponder these questions, here's a final thought to leave you with if you're not swayed by the arguments for moral skepticism.
Okay.
What is it that gives you confidence in your own moral convictions? What are those bedrock principles or unshakable intuitions that anchor your sense of right and wrong? That's a question worth exploring further.
A fantastic point to end on. Keep those philosophical wheels turning, everyone, and until next time, happy deep diving.